Professor, can you tell me about the tsunami and the earthquake that's happened in Japan, and what are the effects in California?
Sure. So we had a magnitude 8.9 earthquake in Japan. It was the largest earthquake Japan has seen in history. And as you heard in the news, obviously, it caused great destruction all along the Japanese shoreline. It was an earthquake that we call a subduction earthquake, which is created when we have one plate, in this case the Pacific plate, thrusting underneath another, in this case Japan. And that event, that sudden slip event, is what we call a large earthquake. An 8.9 earthquake is much, much, much larger, 100 times larger than any earthquake we can see here in California. The amount of slip, the amount by which the fault moved, was almost 20 meters. That's 60 feet. And the area that slipped was about 400 miles long and 100 kilometers, 100 miles wide. And so this is an incredibly large rupture that we can have in Japan, but not here in California, because we have a very different fault system.
What is our fault system, and can we have something of that scale here?
So here in California, we have a different type of fault system, the San Andreas fault system. The biggest earthquake you can have on that is pretty much the one we saw in 1906, the Great San Francisco earthquake. It ruptured the whole length of the fault line, north to south here in Northern California. In addition to the San Andreas fault, we have the Hayward fault here in the East Bay, and that's one that, as you know, we are expecting to see a magnitude 7 or so event. Both of those earthquakes are very small compared to the one we had in Japan. And so while they're smaller, they can still create a lot of devastation because they lie right underneath our urban area.
Why have we not had a warning for this earthquake?
We don't yet know how to predict earthquakes. So we can establish earthquake hazard. So we knew, and Japan knew, that eventually there would be an earthquake. And that's why Japan was quite prepared. They have very good building standards and preparedness procedures. We just don't know exactly when it will happen. And so that we don't know. And that's true for all earthquakes, not just this one.
Can you talk about the three, you said prediction, future forecasting. You talked about forecasting and predicting. Can you talk about those three elements?
Sure. So forecasting is what we just talked about, right? We can establish how fast plates move, when the last earthquake was, and have a guess at roughly when the next one will be. And we can do that in a pretty sophisticated and statistical manner. Prediction would mean that a day, 2 days before there's something happening that tells us there's going to be an event very soon. And there really hasn't been a unique telltale sign. There are foreshocks. We had foreshocks for this one, but we don't recognize them to be foreshocks until the big one hits, and then we are saying, oh, there were foreshocks too.
And what about the aftershocks?
So every earthquake produces aftershocks. Aftershocks are simply earthquakes in the same area that happen subsequently. It's kind of the whole Earth readjusting itself. And so this earthquake had already hundreds of quite large aftershocks.
Large meaning in the 4 or 5 Richter scale?
4 or 5, some 6s. So there's a certain relationship as to how many aftershocks we would expect. And they will continue for weeks, months, if not years.
And not every earthquake produces a tsunami effect, and this one did. What is the difference between this type of earthquake that has a tsunami versus one that doesn't?
Right, so much of this earthquake happened under the ocean. And so during the earthquake, the ocean seafloor was pushed up very rapidly, and the whole water column gets pushed up. And then that water has to go somewhere and produces this huge wave that spreads across the Pacific and is such a major force that it even reaches California many hours later.
So it has reached California many hours later, and can you respond to what's happening in California?
Right, so we have reports of tsunami arrivals in Santa Cruz, Crescent City, all along the shoreline. And in some harbors, it has created some damage. I don't think anybody got hurt or lives were lost. But I'm sure there's going to be quite some damage to boats and piers and harbor facilities.
At this point, is there any danger in the California area as far as the seashore related to aftershocks with this major earthquake?
No, that would be not something we would expect. Every now and then, a very large earthquake can produce some small events all around the world, but not actually particularly here in California. So we would not expect any further consequence here in California.